Good evening, everybody, and welcome to an Olys live chat show tribute to Gerson da Cunha. Gerson da Cunha, many of us know, and I'm sure all of us know who have come to attend the show today, has been one of the last of the Mohicans. But then, was he just an advertising man? Yes, and no. Was he a theatre person? Yes, and no. Was he a writer? Yes, and no. Was he a social activist? Yes and no. So Gerson was so much of a multifaceted person that we really, these people are so easy to discuss when we are here on a platform like this. And on behalf of the advertising community, Olys, the advertising roundtable, today we are here to pay our respects and tribute and talk about the life and times of Gerson da Cunha. Now, my guest here today, I have three guests who will be joining us. So, the first person I have who I'll be bringing in is Mr. Paul Fernandes. Paul Fernandes is here from Bangalore. He is a product of the Faculty of Fine Arts of MS School in Vadodara, and he's a cartoonist. He's a cartoonist. He has worked in advertising, and he has recently been working on a book of cartoons in which Gerson and he had come very close, and they were interacting with each other. And so Paul is here to give us a lot of glimpses about his experiences of being working with Gerson. Then we have again Mr. Feisal Alkazi. Hello, Feisal. Welcome to the show. And Feisal, as you know, is the theatre person we have in the country today. And here, there are two reasons why he is here. One is because of the theatre, and Gerson has been theatre. The other is his family has known Gerson for, I think, ever since it all happened. Since the time you were born, probably, Feisal. That's the time you probably
much before I was.
Oh, much before that. So that's how it goes. So Feisal will be talking to us about the various aspects of his personal recounting with and the theatre with Gerson da Cunha. And we have with us Kaushik Roy. Now, Kaushik, the advertising person over here, who has been in the business for about 4 decades. And he has been with J. Walter Thompson. That's another agency in which Gerson had started his advertising career. He has been with Clarion. He has been with Mudra and Reliance and 4 decades. And he apparently, I did not know, though I have known Kaushik for 4 decades myself, but I did not know that he's made films. And his first love was actually making films. He has made a film, and incidentally, he's also been ad films has been a passion of his. Uh, he has he has also award inducted to the International Advertising Association's Hall of Fame. So that's Kaushik, and I must show you very recently. Kaushik has published this book called Alphabetica. I've just been reading it. It's great fun reading this Alphabetica. And when I first met Feisal, I was actually anchoring an author's chat for the book that he just published last year. Well, last year means a few days ago, technically. It was called Enter Stage Right. What a wonderful book on the, if you're in the theater, you must enter stage right. All right. So let's get, thank you, Anirban. Anirban said that this is a fabulous panel. Thank you, Anirban. And Shutito says, indeed. So indeed, we get on and start with it. So Faisal, I want to start with you because, as you said, you had known him even before, as you said, put it very correctly. So tell us about this even before. And again, another thing about you're going to talk, I'm sure, are the Padamsis, the Alkazis, the Gerson, the Da Cunhas as a whole. And I'm sure people like Zul Villani and others will keep popping in the whole picture. So Faisal, we'd like to start with you. Do tell us.
Okay. So Gerson was very much a part of our family because he'd been involved with my uncle Alec's plays right from when he was in college. Alec and Pearl, both directors, my uncle and my aunt, and also interacted a lot with my parents. My mother was a Padamsi, Roshan Padamsi. She married Ibrahim Alkazi, and that was the couple that was there. So Gerson, when he was in college itself, I wanted to first just paint a picture of what was Bombay like in the 30s and 40s. He was born in 29. So when he was going into college and the last years of school, of course, was very much at the forefront of the national movement and all the big movements with Gandhiji, with Jinnah, with many other leaders, the call for quit India, all happened right there in that city. And I understand as a young college boy, Gerson was very interested. As we all know, in the later part of his life, we only always saw him in, I think, pajama kurta and jackets, and very rarely in Western clothes. And this was an interest that everybody, even my Aunt Pearl, used to be in college in Salwar Kameez, which was all khadi at that point of time. So, what was Bombay like? Bombay in the 30s and 40s was in the middle of a huge building frenzy. So, all the areas that we know now, the whole of Marine Drive, the whole of Chowpatty, all got built at that time, reclaimed from the sea. Because earlier it was just an oval Maidan and then there was nothing. So all the beautiful Art Deco frontages that we see in Bombay belong to this very period. So there's a lot of money in Bombay. And of course, in World War II, there was a huge expat population. Not only soldiers who'd come during World War II, but a lot of Jews who'd taken sort of refuge from Nazi Germany. And in doing the book, which came out last year, this Enter Stage Right, I used part of an interview that my cousin Poo Seani, Aisha Seani, had done with Gerson in the 80s and 90s, and a very extensive, long 60-page interview. And I just read out a bit from that, which which I used an excerpt for in my book. So Gerson remembers, and I'm quoting, I don't think anybody realized that life at that time was going to be as good as it gets. No one realized what a great city this was, referring to Bombay, and what a privilege it was to be a citizen of it. The infrastructure, the water, the sanitation, the central and the western railways, the electricity, all of that was more or less suited to the needs of the population. Traveling by tram and bus at the time was not downgrading at all. It was just logical. And we all did it because what would you do? Take a taxi, but why pay immense amounts of money? Secondly, the hotels and the restaurants were really very lively. In the late 1950s, as I recall, you had 8 important jazz swing groups in the restaurants. The Volga, the Other Room, the Little Heart, Berries. So it was the city where the city matched the needs of its population. You also had a great university, Bombay University. In other words, Bombay was a knowledge center that could not but have its effect and impact on all of us. The quality of discussion at a party at that time was amazing. By contrast, today, you're suddenly aware that you're talking more about the inanities of domestic life. The fact that you don't have a cook and where do you get your next driver from. At that time, that was not the case. There were seminars run by one of my uncles, Derek Jeffries, Alkazi, my father, and by people they invited, like Rudy von Leyden, who was one of the eminent Jewish people who'd run away from Nazi Germany, to talk about modern art. There was a kind of interactive chemistry that ended up in a benefit to both sides. Then there were these spaces that become the focus of stimulation. The newly established Jahangir Art Gallery, and soon after, the Bhulabhai Desai Institute. The Progressive Artists Group, where was modern art, modern painting was going on. And in the city, 2 symphony orchestras. There were 2 symphony orchestras, the Bombay Symphony and the Bombay Philharmonic. So these were the focuses of enlightenment, if you like. So what a vivid picture of a city at that point of time in the 40s and 50s, just before and after independence. While he was still in college, there's a delightful story that Gerson often told, and which is also part of my book. He'd gone to see my uncle Bobby Padamsee, Sultan Padamsee's production of Shakespeare's Othello. And he started that production by the last scene, by the murder scene. So it starts by Othello strangling Desdemona, and then the whole play comes back as a flashback. And Gerson thought this was delightful, He had no idea that it was a far cry from what Shakespeare had originally written. But very soon, because he was in St. Xavier's College, where so much of my family was, he was inducted into theatre. And one of the first roles, when he was very, very young, he played opposite my aunt, Pearl Padamsee. She played the shrew in Taming of the Shrew. And Gerson, of course, played Petruchio. in that production. It was a fascinating one because theatre group was all very much based in the Padamsi family. And all the rehearsals were in my grandmother's house, where every Saturday there were huge parties. This was in Kolaba, still over there, Kulsum Terrace. My cousin Ryan stays there. Huge parties. And I think it was a forum where in Bombay, Bombay tends to be very segregated neighborhoods. So the Parsis are in one place, uh, the Goan community stays elsewhere, the Muslims are tucked away in other parts of the city. But here was a forum, I think the theatre and the arts, both of which drew Gerson to them, where people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and also all classes could mix together in a very democratic kind of way. And I think that's a very fundamental part. The idea of equality is very fundamental to Gerson's personality. So my father was not very well off. He lived in Muhammad Ali Road, really uh, a real Muslim kind of locality. Souza, who lived very close by, the artist F.N. Souza, very much in Bombay at the time, he lived just next to Crawford Market. Hussain, other artists, literally lived on the footpaths of Bombay. But they would be rubbing shoulders with very well-educated boys from Xavier's College, like Gerson or Alec or so many other people who've come out of those kind of institutions. And then he went on acting in plays. Of course, everybody talks about Zul directing him in Othello with his fabulous voice, very rich baritone kind of voice. And then by the late 50s, my father pulled him into production. And that was the first production, I think, of Samuel Beckett's wonderful absurd play, Waiting for Godot, done outside of Paris and London. So I think the first Asian production was done by my father. It ran for 13 shows, which was phenomenal at that time. We had a theatre on the roof of our building. We stayed in the flat below where everything was rehearsed. And then upstairs, there was the theatre, open air theatre, open to the sky and to the sea and to the stars. And Gerson played that very formidable part of Pozzo, with my father playing Lucky, who was the servant. And it was interesting that the other big honcho of advertising at that time, Kaisi Katrak, played one of the two champs in that particular production. So Kaisi and Manohar Pitale, they were pitched against each other with my father directing the play. And while they were working on that, which I remember, I would have been all of 6 years old, and always remembers Gerson's big personality. He was associated with some Jesuit institution in Chembur, which was the boondocks at that time, very far off. In Chembur, that's the burbs, the suburbs of Bombay. And they were doing some big production on the story of Christ. And Gerson was very disappointed with the rehearsals he saw. So he reached out to my father and said, Alkazi, please come and take charge of this. Write a new script and you direct it, and let your wife Roshan, my mother did all the costumes, work with it. And my father said, okay. He reconceptualized the whole thing, took all the lines out of the mouths of the actors, just chose large sections of the Bible, which he and Gerson read. And these were all live shows, beautiful classical Western music, and created a huge pageant-like production. And that was perhaps the precursor for my father going into these huge productions later in Delhi at the Purana Killa that everybody knows. And then, of course, Gerson went on acting, very much a part of our family. We kind of a family gathering without Gerson and Uma being very central to the whole thing. And of course, his younger brother, Sylvie, as well, acted a lot. With my father, he was in Ghosts. My father played Pastor Manders and Sylvie played Oswald, one of the lead roles. So whenever we went to Bombay, Pooh would arrange a party and Gerson and Uma would be there and recounting a lot of the stories before I was born of what had happened in the theatre group and his interaction with the family. So he'd be sorely missed by all of us as the Padamsi, certainly. Over to you, Sujit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, Faisal, this is the very exciting times you have talked about. You have talked about the theatre, your father, Gerson, Zul Velani, and others, and also that point of time, Souza, you mentioned, Hussain, and I think another person who would be remembered much for that period from Mumbai was probably Victor Paranjoti,
Of
the
course.
Bombay choir.
Yeah.
Yes, so that was all. It was all there at that point of time, and something is totally, obviously, with time it's gone. But then it's a great thing is that you all are still carrying that forward. As a matter of
Absolutely.
fact, you talked about this place where your grandmother would have any point of time you all could, I mean, everybody could walk
Have
in with
parties
30
and
guests.
rehearsals, all the
And I remember
rehearsals. Yeah.
after all the rehearsals happened there. And I remember after Shunu Sen died, there was
Yes.
a kind of a small program chat show on NDTV where they were talking Shunu Sen. And there was Alek and there was Gerson. And Gerson mentioned that the kind of parties they used to have. And he talked about that how Shunu would dance to lipstick on my collar, a kind of those numbers. So that was really the. I mean, I could sense the kind of excitement that was really happening in those kind of situations, which with time. I'll come back to you, Faisal, with more such stories. But Paul, I want to
Sure.
go to you now. Paul, you have been very close to him the last number of years working on the book. Could you tell us something about the Gerson, the person that you met, and he was helping you out in that book on cartoons?
Well, I first met Gerson about half a century ago when I was a young student of commercial art, advertising design. And I was sent to him by an aunt of mine and another very good friend, Peter Colasso, who said, I've got to go and just meet Gerson. So one fine day and I think their credentials were good enough because one fine day I found myself in his office in Bombay and him smiling down benignly at me. And this meeting lasted not more than 2 seconds or maybe 2.5, when I was whisked away by the studio manager and given my first job in Bombay as the junior most person in the agency. But unfortunately, the job didn't last for more than 4 hours because it started off on the wrong note when I dropped this large tin of rubber solution on the studio manager's chair. and all in all, the studio at Lintas of that time was far too glamorous, far too fashionable for a young Bangalore boy. So when the lunch break came, I just ran away. And I don't think Gerson, or for that matter, anyone else noticed. I met him again.
That was me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
Well, the next time I met him was 35 or 40 years later, somewhere in 2015, when another good friend, Stan Pinto in Bangalore, said I must go and see Gerson with this new book that I was working on. And it was a very rough draft at that time, but I decided to take it to him, and it was called Coastline, and it was to take its audience down that incredible west coast of India, from Bombay to Goa to Mangalore and then to Kerala. And who better to show it to than the original West Coaster, who often said, I was born and bred in Bombay, but I'm going to the last bite of prawn balchao and bibinka. So, and he kind of liked what he saw, because he said, I'd like to keep that book for a few days and look into it.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience showing him that book. But every time we went to Bombay after that, we'd go and meet him, and my wife would come with me always, because she was fascinated with the man Gerson. She often described him as the true luminary. And one day she came to me and said, Paul, I've fallen in love. So I said, don't worry, even I've fallen in love with him. but but we'd sit in his living room, always at about tea time at 4 in the evening when he was bright and cheerful, and gaze out of those beautiful windows overlooking the Oval Maidan and the Rajabai clock tower, and he'd talk about his first love, Bombay, and he'd talk often when it got a bit late, he'd fish out the dregs of some old rare scotch, and he'd say, "Let's put this bottle out of its misery." And, yeah, so those were wonderful memories I have. Wonderful memories I have of this very great man.
Yes, absolutely, Paul. Absolutely, really. They don't make people like these anymore. If I were to just, I think all
No,
of us would agree on that. And uh, yeah, I have just two encounters with Gerson. One was in my avatar as the general secretary of the advertising club in Calcutta. We decided to induct him into the Hall of Fame. The gentleman who had got the Hall of Fame just before him was Alek Padamsee, and next year it went to we decided to induct Gerson. And Gerson used to then stay in Delhi, doing that consultancy with WHO or UNICEF or whatever. And he came down to Kolkata. And since it was Gerson da Cunha coming himself to Kolkata to receive the Hall of Fame, we had put up, and Kaushik, you will know him, Prashun Dutt. Prashun Dutt, the media guy, was put on and
Yes,
given
yes.
the role of being the minister in waiting, which meant that he had to go to the airport because we need somebody to go to the airport and visit Gerson. And since this was just happening before, on the awards night day, I was as secretary very busy running around putting things together. So Proshun went in and Proshun wore a suit to meet Gerson because, he thought he was meeting Gerson da Cunha, which he later realized was a blunder that he had done. And after the Hall of Fame and all that happened with CCFC parting away, and we were calling him, and at least I was calling him sir. Sir. After a few sirs, I got a rap. He actually asked me, "Why are you calling me sir?" And I think that was a very Gerson like. So I said, no. I mean, I'm just trying to, be. Call me Gerson. I mean, you don't have to call me sir. Call me Mister. No, you call me Gerson. So that was the first time. What a delightful evening we had after that. And later in Delhi, I was an advisor to a NGO, and we had got into a strategy jam. And they would not listen to the advertising people. We, the advertising people, would not listen to the client because we thought what they were doing was a lot of rubbish. They thought what we were doing was a lot of rubbish. So this was, but the project was being funded by UNICEF. So Gerson was brought in one of his trips to be the mediator, and we all went in for a meeting with Gerson. And I reminded him, sir, I was, again, I didn't call him sir. I told him I was there, in Ad Club, Kolkata, etc. He said, okay, let's hear them out. So we both presented our viewpoints, and Gerson listened to the whole thing like a judge. He sat there in the middle, he listened to everything, did nodding, did ho-hum. And then he said, okay, I will tell you what to do. And then he looked at me and said that, listen, just do a simple advertising brand documentation strategy and you're through. So I knew that was a hint that, we have been able to. And masterly, he walked out and said, I have another meeting. So that was a wonderful way to get through the whole thing. Kaushik, I want to come to you now. You and I have
Yeah.
spent the same amount of time in advertising, almost, plus minus here and there. And you have gone on to, I must tell you this, that you have gone on to great heights. And most importantly, you are one of the founding members of the Subhash Ghoshal Foundation. And you had once come out with this wonderful hardcover book on Mr. Ghoshal, which I possess.
Right.
And so you have been interacting with Gerson because there was an article by Gerson, or there is an interview with Gerson in that book, Kaushik, if I remember correct. So
Right.
do tell us about your interaction of the advertising person, because that's where you have been talking.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Can I be heard? Is it loud enough?
Yeah. We can hear
Oh,
you.
good.
Sure, sure.
All right. So first of all, Srijit, I think the discussion before me, I mean, whatever was said, and especially the part about theatre, I think given that it would be very wrong to, talk about Gerson as an ad man, because, it's like you started off by saying he was a journalist, a social communicator, activist, and an ad man, but more importantly, he was always the theater person. I think there was theater in everything that he did. And the first time that I saw Gerson, I'm not a theater person. I haven't really been watching a lot of plays in Mumbai, but uh, I was fortunate to see him on stage. This was at Prithvi, where he was playing Mr. Ruff in The Gaslight. And I was blown by his performance because, what I really remember, the first thing that struck me was the ease with which he delivered his lines and the way he moved around and, the half lit, dark stage that he was doing his part. And what I remember was that he had this very clear diction, the diction which had no acquired or put on accent, uh, that made him sound so erudite, yet quintessentially Indian. And many
Yes.
years later, I had like you spoke about the Subhash Koshal Foundation. I was very fortunate to, being invited. I mean, as a young cub almost, because, all the others were very senior. And it was Titu Aluwalia who actually had started this whole initiative. I was invited more by Shumantro Ghoshal, Mr. Subhash Goshal's son, who's a friend and very famous ad film maker and now a renowned documentary filmmaker. And when I joined this group, I was kind of overwhelmed, sitting like a schoolboy in front of a legend like Gerson da Cunha. But there was no superior air about him. He, in fact, introduced himself much like, when you said sir, he said, "Hello, my name is Gerson da Cunha." And I later discovered that that is the way he would normally kind of introduce himself. And if I may say that, he sounded a lot better than James Bond, who would normally say, "I'm Bond," James Bond. I mean, Gerson da Cunha was certainly sounding a lot better than that. And for those of you who know him and what he looked like, but maybe some of you would like to perhaps see this picture of this very handsome and very distinguished looking bearded man, wavy hair that matched the pristine white chicken kurta pajama that he always wore, twinkling eyes, and a very good natured smile that gave away the happiness that he carried in him. I mean, Gerson, when he laughed, his whole body would laugh. His shoulders would kind of, bounce up and down. There was something about him that, he was so full of life that he was sharing all that with you. This tall,
Yeah.
imposing frame of his, that it didn't suggest that he had a single bone of malice in him, which I think was my take, the way I saw him. And I later realized that my reading of the man was very much what I had sort of seen in him. And it would be very important to point out over here that Subhash Ghoshal and Gerson da Cunha were professional rivals, though they may have worked together at HTA, JWT, but they were rivals because they pitched against each other for the Pawns business, one from JWT, HTA, and the other
Yes.
from Lifters. But here was this man so graciously lending support to the Subhash Ghoshal Foundation. And I think that is something that we need to remember, because these were the values of that time of, how people sort of, in spite of being rivals, they would always rally together when there was a common cause. And every time we met, he had this wonderful way of starting a conversation by saying, "Kaushik, dear boy, so tell me what's happening these days." And mind you, it was not just a just a blank statement. He was a very keen listener. He was very curious to know about what was happening around the world, especially he would be very keen to hear things from younger people who were engaged in uh, businesses and things that he was not so familiar with. For instance, he was always a great listener to understand what was happening with mobile telecommunication. And obviously, he respected feedback from younger people. Again, going back to Shumantro, who was just about 30 years, 30 years or so when Gerson wrote his book, the book of poems. And Shumantro was somebody he had hired in Lintas. The book, which is so far that many of us know about, uh, he came across to Shumantro's house and shared the poems, read the poems, and wanted his feedback. And I mean, as Shumantro later said, that he could have easily told me to go across to his house, which I would, but he came across. And what Shumantro did was that he wrote a very long note, etc., etc., and Gerson thanked him profusely, but ignored all of it and wrote exactly what he wanted to. But what Shumantro says is that, that was Gerson. I mean, he took everything, but he chose what he thought was right, but he never failed to acknowledge Shumantro in his book. And you know, talking about Gerson the ad man, which I think, which I know a little bit about, but I have to say that this is what I have gathered from people like Roger Pereira, who knew him very well, and Roger is a dear friend and who I've followed as far as the IAA is concerned. Roger brought IAA to India. So what if I had to describe Gerson as a man, I would say that he had a very wide windscreen in front of him, which is what gave him a kind of panoramic view of the world, which he sort of soaked in. He never lost his view of the rear view mirror because he had an uncanny memory. I mean, he carried his past, but he had a way of looking forward. So he joined from being a cub, journalist with PTI. He joined Peter Philbin's JWT, and he was a copy person, and he was known to have worked on the Air India campaigns, and he was a writer. And I believe in those days, Kemp's Corner was famous for having a Air India hoarding. And at some point, the flyover came and blocked it, and then they had to move it to Nariman Point. And this is what I know a little bit that about his HTA days, and I also understand that he interacted with Mr. Ghoshal, but he joined Lintas at a time when Lintas was more like an in-house agency. This was about 1955, where he worked for 25 years, as we all know. This was an in-house agency, which was the sixth floor of Raman House, which is the lever's office. And Razmi Ahmed was the head of the advertising unit, which is actually Lever's International Advertising Service. That was Lintas. And here, Gerson obviously, kept growing, and at a certain point when his creative director, an Australian person called Roger Delegamo, left, he then became the creative director, and then Razmi Ahmed also left, and then he was the head. And what I think, which is very interesting to learn over here, is that it was Gerson who got Alec Padamsi into Lintas, and both were the theatre buddies. But there's a little joke about how Alec was the director, so he could shout at Gerson during the rehearsals, but in the office, they said that Gerson could shout at Alec. But I suspect that Gerson would never shout, because he was never quite the person that I would think that would raise his voice. Now, Gerson is known to have created many of the Dalda campaigns, etc., which is what will be generally written about. But from somebody who's worked in Lintas in those days, they this person has given a lot of credit to Gerson for the fact that he has been responsible for many of the other levers campaigns, including Liril. And what I think is very important is that he changed Lintas from being the in-house agency to being a full-service agency, which brought in clients like MRF and Hercules Bikes. So by the time he left in, I think, 1980, when he joined UNICEF, Alec Padamsi took over from Gerson, and he inherited a very strong foundation. And by the way, this foundation must have been strong enough that within a couple of years, Alec gave HTA a run for its money by claiming that it was the #1 agency. Here is another interesting thing that I learned about the contrasting styles, between Gerson and Alec. And this is again from Shumantru, who went for his first job interview. And so Gerson was the first to interview him, and he asked, what is your interest in life? What do you want to do? So Shumantru, who was obviously somebody who loved cinema, he said that I like feature films and I watch a lot of films. So this is what Gerson apparently told him. He said, advertising is like a sonnet, precisely written in 14 lines using rhyme schemes, but any rhyme scheme, but typically having 10 syllables per line. But dear boy, what you're aspiring to write is epic poetry. Now, this is Gerson. Now, Alex says, advertising is a swimming pool, but you won't get to see the bikini-clad women if you choose to dip your toe in the shallow end of the pool. You got to dive into the deep end. So these are the two. I thought Shumantro giving this. I loved it for the fact that here is one agency, two theatre persons. Two speaking in two very distinct styles. What I thought was amazing. And of course, the rest we know that he moved on to UNICEF, and for the fact that he spoke Portuguese very fluently, he was posted in Brazil, and he did some amazing work, which is, I think, a fine example for people who work in advertising, that you can use your talent in so many wonderful ways to change life around you. So in Brazil, he was recognized for he became a cult figure, in fact, for his good looks and everything else, and for the fact that he did this amazing campaign to promote breastfeeding, and that was what got him the Order of the Rio Branco, which I think was maybe one of the highest honors in Brazil. And that, I think, is a wonderful way of saying how one advertising person has actually made all of us very, very proud. And, also, of course, some of you know that he made use of all his energy to work in this area where he started Agni. And I'm very glad for one thing that he's been able to do, and which is that he started this PLI to declare bunds as illegal. And he was a man who managed to make one political party, which I'm not mentioning, to scoff up some 20 lakhs as penalty. So this is the kind of person that I know. Of course, there are various other anecdotes which we can come back later.
Well, Kaushik, I must tell you this, when we were chatting the other day and saying that, I want you to come on the show, you were saying that, you had so little to do with Gerson. But do you realize that in the whole spur, you have spoken such a lot because you really knew him so well. So you were not with the truth that you had just known him kind of thing. I know you had also known him later in a lot of other areas, but I'm glad you touched so many subjects. Interestingly, you're talking about his J. Walter Thompson days when he was there as a copywriter, and I read this in one of Gerson's essays, that after he had done his first piece of writing or whatever, he had showed this to the boss, who I think may have been a white skin or whatever. He looked at Gerson's style of writing. And mind you, Gerson had already been in JWT or HTA after having done Reuters and All India Radio and all that.
Right.
He told him that he looked at it and he said, I suggest you read this book. And he gave him a copy of a book called The Art of Simple Writing. And Gerson says that the book, The Art of Simple Writing, made all the difference. By the way, I was not aware of the book, but when I read that, I actually went to the net, I downloaded a PDF copy of The Art of Simple Writing. So I think that's just a story to build it in. And in the meantime, there are
That's
people, you
that's
talked
a
about rubber.
sonnet.
Huh?
That's a sonnet in
That's a
14 lines.
yes. That's a right, absolutely. So well described. And Paul, you talked about dropping that rubber solution tin, right? And my friend Sudeep Tho, he says rubber solution, good old memories of something without which advertising agencies could not be thought of. Because in an ad agency,
No.
you needed those big drums of rubber solution. And Anirban Bappa Dotto, this is to you, Faisal, says that thank you, Faisal, for the stimulating description of that tremendously creative period in Bombay, which I think it was, and later things did get diluted. But talking about the creative period in Bombay, Faisal, you had the two Dakunas. You had Sylvie Dakuna, you had Gerson Dakuna, and I had once worked in an agency which was it had housed under the same roof people like Sylvester Dakuna, Korean. It's a very old agency called ASP, does not exist any longer. They had a kind of a person called Mr. Jognath Chatterjee, who, and there was Usha Katrak. Everybody was a part of ASP, including Sham. And Sham's assistant was Prahlad Kakkad, as the story we know. But Sylvie, of course, ASP shut down in Bombay, and then everybody branched out. Korean went his way, and Sylvie did Amul, and that's. But I know this, and Kaushik, you might remember many years ago, Sylvie had come to for something in Ad Club Kolkata. In one of these do's we were having near the lakes, and he was asked to speak, and he actually sang. I mean, this was something that we were not used to. An advertising person and a Sylvester Dakuna comes and sings a song that was his entrance into the club. And it was something that I think many of us who were there will never forget this, but that's how the whole thing went. But tell me something, Faisal, how is it that so many, and you mentioned Katrak also here in between correctly, how come so many advertising people were in the business of the theater or other
I think a
performing
lot of
arts for
them,
that matter?
yeah, I think Sujit, a lot of them got inducted while they were still in their college years. Like even Usha, you mentioned, Usha Katrak, Usha Amin, who became
Yes.
Usha Katrak, very much very prominent actress, both with my father and with Alec and with Pearl in many of the plays. So all these people came into the theatre scene at the same point of time. I think it was that whole community of so many different people. And as I pointed out, I think the theatre is a place which draws a range of different talents. So if you've got a kind of visual sense, if you've got a fantastic voice, if you're doing stuff on All India Radio, if you have an interest in reading the latest kind of European literature. And I remember later I've also used it in the book. I think Gerson is sort of asked by my cousin, by Pooh, that who saw the plays that you all were doing, because they were doing Sartre, they were doing No Exit, they were doing Cream Passionnel, they were doing J.B. Priestley, which Pooh's father, Hamid Sayani, Amin's brother, acted and directed in many of the plays, both with Alec and my father, the plays that he directed himself. And I think they made the point that so much of the audience in Delhi, in Bombay at the time, in the 40s and the 50s, was expat. It was an expat audience. So they were ready for very challenging material on the stage. So really to see an existential play by Sartre, dark as anything, hell is other people, all the existential angst of a No Exit or a Cream Passionnel in the 50s in Bombay, I think was it was really food for the mind. So I think it was a group of people who were very intellectually stimulated by the theatre, and parallelly, so many of them were exposed to the world of art. It was a theatre group after my father came back from England, from RADA. He did huge exhibitions called This is Modern Art. And everybody was there. They had discussions, talks. Nissim, Ezekiel was very much part of the core kind of group of people. So I think there are moments in the history of any country. Also, you must remember this was the euphoria of a newly found freedom for all of them, you know. And I think that was very great. And so many of the people in the freedom struggle were young. So these people were looking up to heroes like Nehru, who was still young, dashing, part of that anglicized world, speaking the same kind of ideas. So it was a different synergy, perhaps, that was there between the arts and the common person. Not that Gerson was a common person at all. He came from such an erudite family, you know. Sylvian Gerson's father was a historian in his own kind of right. But I think this became, what should one say, something of a crucible for them, working in the theatre. And then we all know how inspired all of us are, even till today, young theatre people, by the writings of somebody like a Shakespeare or a Euripides or an Arthur Miller or any of the greats in theatre writing and dramatic writing. Yeah. And then he pulled all of that together with his strong Jesuit upbringing, and also had a very strong interest in his own religion and in his own culture, and cultivating that. I remember years later he reached out to me, because I've done a lot of heritage work across India, in Jaipur, Kashmir, Delhi and Hyderabad, and said, come and do something, because in the latter part of his life he led a lot of conservation efforts in Bombay. And that was also Gerson. That was Gerson. I think he set up some organization. Yeah.
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, talking about the Bombay, he had started the Earth movement. You know, the Earth Summit in 1992, when I think this magazine called the Earth Times was first launched, and subsequently, of course, he had this poem called Bombay Wala, one of his poems by the same name, where he had, later, of course, somewhere down the line, he has said that he's a Bombay Wala, not exactly a Mumbaikar. You know, there is a slight, there's a lot of difference between a Bombay Wala and a Mumbaikar. Okay, Paul, let me come back to you one more time. You know, all these obits that were being written about Gerson, and by people who knew him. And I think once he had a meeting with Jerry Pinto, and the meeting was at 4 o'clock, and he came in at 4 minutes to 4 o'clock, and he told Jerry that can I ignore you because I think I'm late. So even coming 4 minutes before time to him was like having come late. So he was wanting to ignore Jerry, that I don't know you, so I don't have to say sorry to you. That was, I think. But everybody has talked about the fact that I was at Imtiaz Harkar's place in London, and we had breakfast, and somebody had lunch, and somebody had dinner, and Kaushik talks about, or you talk about those dregs which were put into, taken out of misery. You have been interacting with him at his house in the 2015-2016 time. What was this whole breakfast, lunch, and dinner at Gerson? You must have been a part of it.
Not really. It was mainly tea and biscuits, which was his time. You know, that afternoon time was because he worked at night, and most of the emails I've received from him were written at well past midnight, at 2 and 3 in the morning. So he was a night bird. But
All
you know,
right.
he had such a tremendous sense of giving. Because one fine day when I went over, he'd written he was a powerful, simple writer too, because he'd written these 4 wonderful paragraphs of text that he showed me about the book I was showing him, and it became the forward of that book finally. But you know, he had such a spirit of.
Paul, can you show it to us?
Oh, I wish I could. I'll try and. Ra, can you find a Coastline copy from downstairs?
Yeah.
I'll try and show it to you.
Yeah, if you could do that.
You know, but
yeah,
he had such a spirit of giving that when I asked him to come to the gateway room at the Taj to launch the book, he agreed without any hesitation, even though at that time he was kind of he had to walk with a stick and he couldn't climb a step on his own, but he agreed to come with such readiness. And when I offered to come and pick him up and drop him back, he said, "No, I'll be there. Where there's a will, there's a wheelchair."
Yeah. That's such a
That was
wonderful
his
line.
famous line.
Famous line,
So,
yes. Yes.
no,
Kaushik,
we're
one more
talking
thing.
about,
You
yeah,
have been a
go ahead.
filmmaker, Kaushik.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So the book, yeah.
That's the book. There you are, Coastline. Okay, right. Can you just, I think there is a slight, that's it. So this book is available on Amazon, Paul? Coastline?
I
Do you
think
get it on
I think it
Amazon?
is. Yes.
Is there? Excellent. All right. Okay, thanks. Okay, Kaushik, one more time back to you. This I'm addressing you as a filmmaker. Now, you have made a feature film, and I think Gerson had acted in 4 films other than the theater.
Yes.
One was, of course,
Yeah.
Cotton Mary, then there was Electric Moon, there was, he did this Ashoka, and I think he also
Ashoka.
did Water, Yashoka and
Yes.
Water.
Water. Yes.
Then you had his wife who was writing on cinema for such a long time. So all put together, have you ever interacted with him in your capacity as you the filmmaker, he the film man?
Well, I have to say that I'll combine two or three things in this part. One is food.
Mhm.
The other is the part about giving, and also about Gerson the man in terms of his high level of energy. When it comes to food, Uma has been a wonderful friend, and she's such a wonderful person because my film, which is a very small film, so to speak, though of course there was Irfan Khan in it, which at that point in time it wasn't such a big thing, but today it's a big thing to talk about. My film called Apna Asman, and it also had Shobana, who is very famous in the South, and this was the first Hindi film. Now, when I did this film, Uma helped me out tremendously in terms of watching the film and then sharing it with some other people who were the people who went around selecting films for festivals, and I was able to actually send it to many of the festivals only because of Uma. And during this period, I remember they hosted a dinner where they called a few directors, some senior, some budding like me, and they laid out such a wonderful dinner. And I saw that in that Gerson played the kind of second fiddle. He was sort of letting Uma sort of be in charge of everything because it was a very film-driven kind of agenda. And but they were such gracious hosts. And talking about Gerson, well, we always talk about him as the person who's from theatre, though he's acted in cinema. Every year when Uma went to Cannes, Gerson would always be there. And my meeting with Gerson happened in 2008. And see, he wasn't exactly young. I mean, he would have been almost touching 80 at that stage, yes. And
Wow.
he was, again, in his white kurta pajama with his walking stick. And I suddenly found Gerson and I said, "Oh, Gerson, you're here." And he said, "So what are you doing here, Kaushik?" And so I said that I've got a film. So he said, "Oh, you've got a film, meaning where?" So I said that I got the screening. So of course, I'll come and see it. And I was really touched that he wrote a big article about the films that he had seen, and in that he spent. I mean, it was about some other film, but he actually said such lovely things about my film, and he went on to say that that how as a newcomer I'd handled it with sympathy and skill, and it was unexpected for somebody who was doing his first feature. And I thought it was very kind of him, but more importantly, uh, the spirit with which he went about doing this, writing his articles, which would appear in the Times of India, and and being so much into it, in the sense that he had to be a part of all these things, which actually goes to show that he was a man who enjoyed everything to do with the arts, which is not restricted to theater alone. I think anything
Yeah.
that had any kind of performance or any kind of storytelling, whether it
Yeah.
was advertising or social communication, he was. And of course, the other small little bit that I have to add is about Sylvie and uh, Gerson. I mean, both I've met, and both are, like you said, full of life. And at least Sylvie, of course, would crack jokes and all that, and so did Gerson. And there is this famous thing about, they had this little uh, uh, joke where one would introduce the other as saying, "Come and meet Gerson. He's my brother from my mother's side." And then Gerson would say, "Come meet Sylvie. He's my brother from my father's side." So, so this was the amazing thing about them. I mean,
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. Well, I think time has permitted us to take this on. And I think in more ways than one, I think all, not that we have covered all aspects of Gerson, but if I were just to react as a listener, not being a part of this very uh, wonderful team that we are here today, is that, well, what a great guy. What a great guy. And I think all of us are really going to miss him. And uh, those of us who have been watching this, I must just wanted to add that this event will be up on YouTube. We will give you the link on our Olys page in Facebook, and I'll pass this link on to you in another day or two's time, when it's so that people, those who have missed your friend, they can see it again. But yeah, there is a thing. It says that our eminent guest for that evening, enriching evening. That's the word I was looking for. It's been a very, very enriching evening. We are just a bunch of practitioners who joined advertising in India in the 80s. And this is the kind of a world in which we had actually come. And never mind where it is gone now. We'll leave it for another day. So I wanted to thank all of you. And my okay, but Tathagata Chatterjee, I think he's a friend of yours. Kaushik has one pop-up question that's come up, saying that why don't people from theatre and films join advertising nowadays? Well, I think that's a subject for another discussion. We don't have that anymore. Kaushik, want to take that?
well, actually, I don't have the answer, but I suspect that we don't perhaps know, but there could be several people who are still, living the double life, so to speak. Because I have a very good friend who's been very close to the Da Cunha family, Kunal Vijaykar, who is also known as the foodie. He's still very active as a theatre person, and he's been an advertising writer with Da Cunha's. And there are several others like who have also done the same thing. Yeah, I think maybe it is possible that there are more people who are in advertising today who are also doing something in films. So maybe the change that has happened is that you have a kind of corridor where advertising becomes a corridor into films rather than theater.
Right. Yeah. Possible. Exactly. Yeah. In fact, we have had, but that those numbers are now becoming far and few in between. Earlier, you had a large number of people from the theater and cinema working in advertising, and vice versa. But that number is over the period of time, it's still dwindling.
Bugs is
Well, I
another
think there's
person.
one more
Bugs,
person.
Bhargav.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, bugs. Yeah, exactly. Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Very
Yes.
fine communicator.
And well, I must tell you this story about Alek. Once Alek was invited in Kolkata to deliver the Ark. This is typically Alek to deliver the Ark Ki Sarkar memorial lecture, which is it was an annual lecture in those days in Kolkata. And from the morning of the show, I was getting calls from my friend in Lintas saying that, are you all giving this projector? Are you all doing that? So I had to tell Pratik, we are very poor people. I mean, nobody pays even subscription fee for the ad. So don't ask us to bring all this equipment. So then I told him, excuse me, but why do you want all this? He's supposed to deliver a speech. R.K. Sarkar Memorial lecture by Alek Padamsi. He's supposed to come to the podium, take out his file and give a speech. Why do you want all these jazz, all kinds of gizmos which we had not heard of? Pratik told me, well, I think he's actually planning a rerun of Evita. I said, what? He said, yes. And believe you me, when we went there in the evening, first thing he tells me that you will thank me on the screen. I said, but what do you mean on the screen? So this was 1990, 91, still not used to all this. He says, I'll be on the screen, you thank me there. So I said, fair enough. I didn't argue with him. And then I realized what was the thing was that had thanking him on the screen after a lot of drama, which was Alek, absolute, like all the theatrical, everything happened. And then the last shot was that his face would remain on the screen while Alek would walk away. So the frame would stay frozen on the screen. And that is what I realized that what was meant by saying you will thank the screen. So not to be undone, I also said, thank you very much, Alek, by looking at the screen and not looking at the audience or doing all that. Maybe I thought that's the drama he would have preferred. So that's what it has been like. Another person I want to thank for making this show, putting this show together today is my very, very old friend, Gangadhar Menon. And because he put me on to Paul. And
Hi, Ganga. Good to hear you.
There you are. And I think one day, we must sit down and talk about these great advertising people who were there into theater, into writing poetry. Frank Simos, for example, with whom I was quite close to him in his last years. He's the only person who could have told me when I told him that, why did you start an ad agency? And he tells me. He tells me because I wanted to get out of it. I said, what do you mean? You wanted to get out of the business because you started a business. He told me, Sujit, the only way you can make good, quick money is doing sincere, hard advertising work. You do it for a few years, make your money, come outside, live peacefully, have your vodka tonic in the afternoon, and write books. And then he presented me with that Glad Tidings in Goa, that book that Frank had written. Such people you will not get them. So we close this session today, and thank you very much, Feisal, Paul, Kaushik, for having come in. I can count on you. I'm sure I will tap on you for more such sessions as and when they come up. And please say yes to all my requests. Thank you very much, and thank you, audience, for being there. This has been a lovely, lovely session, and I'll put this up on YouTube in a day or two. So with that, I think we say thank you, Gerson, first for giving us this wonderful, the period that, which I think both Feisal, Paul, and Kaushik had talked about. This is absolutely amazing, certainly extremely rich. Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll catch you soon again.
Paul, Feisal, Sujit.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Super.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.